Welcome back to Criminally Human, where behind every headline is a person, a story, and a tragedy that didn't have to happen. Before we move on, I'd like to thank each and every one of you for helping me to grow this channel, and a special thank you to my very first sub. When you think of Jacksonville, Florida, your first thoughts probably don't go to crime. The city sits on the Atlantic coast, with miles of sandy beaches, a proud NFL team, and a skyline cut by the sweeping St. Johns River. It is a city of growth, with new businesses popping up, young families moving in, and cultural events meant to showcase its beauty. But for those who live here, especially in its most vulnerable neighborhoods, there's another truth. Jacksonville is one of the most violent cities in Florida, and for years it has carried the grim reputation of being the state's murder capital. The statistics tell part of the story. In 2022, the same year that Shameeka Jackson was murdered, Jacksonville recorded more than 170 homicides. That's nearly one every other day. The number wasn't just high compared to other Florida cities. It was staggering compared to national averages. Miami, with its nightlife and infamy, had fewer murders. Orlando, with its millions of annual visitors, had fewer. Tampa, with its booming economy, had fewer. Yet Jacksonville, a city with far less attention and glamour, kept leading the state in bloodshed. But statistics can only tell so much. To really understand Jacksonville's murder crisis, you have to look at the lived experience. In neighborhoods like Woodstock, Moncrief, Newtown, and the West Side, gunfire is as common as church bells. For children, the sound of bullets is part of the background noise of life. Parents teach their kids how to duck and hide before they ever let them walk alone to school. Grandparents keep candles in their cupboards because vigils are inevitable. And funerals for teenagers and young adults are scheduled so often they blend into the rhythm of the community calendar. Jacksonville is not a city that can pretend this violence doesn't exist. Sits heavy on everyone. Mothers live with a quiet dread that their children might not make it home. Fathers carry the burden of trying to protect their families from dangers that don't come from strangers in dark alleys, but from the boy down the block or the argument outside a convenience store. Young men are pulled into cycles of retaliation. One shooting sparks another. One death breeds two more. The violence feeds itself, and the silence of witnesses keeps it alive. Why is Jacksonville like this? The answers are complicated. Poverty runs deep in certain areas, trapping families in cycles that feel impossible to break. Gangs and cliques hold influence, often with young boys who see them as the only protection they'll ever get. Drugs move through the streets, fueling disputes and debts that too often end with bullets. And looming over it all is a system that struggles to keep up. An overwhelmed sheriff's office, a community that distrusts the very police meant to protect them, and a backlog of cases that keeps growing year after year. For many residents, calling the police isn't an option. They fear retaliation from killers who walk free. They fear being labeled a snitch. And in some cases they fear the police themselves. This silence is one of the deadliest parts of Jacksonville's crisis. Cases go cold not because detectives don't care, but because witnesses won't or can't speak. Justice gets buried under fear, and killers keep living their lives as though nothing happened. In the media, Jacksonville's murders are often reported with little more than a headline. Man shot in West Side neighborhood. Woman found dead in car. Another homicide under investigation. The stories come so frequently that even residents become numb. One week's tragedy is replaced by another's. Names disappear as quickly as they're spoken. Families grieve in public for a few days, hold a vigil, light candles, and then return to the silence, left to carry the pain alone while the city moves on to its next headline. The truth is, Jacksonville has normalized murder. The city lives with it like a chronic illness, and that makes cases like Shameeka Jackson's all the more tragic. Her death wasn't just a shocking act of violence, it was part of a larger storm. Her name joined a list that grows every year, a list that feels endless. And while her family begged for answers, the system stayed quiet, offering little to no closure. When people call Jacksonville the murder capital, it isn't just an exaggeration. It's a reflection of lived reality. Between 2022 and 2024, the murder rate here outpaced not just other cities in Florida, but many across the United States. The numbers don't capture the fear in the air, the empty chairs at dinner tables, or the way whole neighborhoods carry grief like a second skin. But they do prove what families already know. Jacksonville is drowning in violence. This is the city where Shameeka Jackson lived. This is the city where she worked, laughed, and raised her children. And this is the city where, on July 22, 2022, her life was taken. Her story is not just her own. It is woven into Jacksonville's long and painful history of murder, silence, and injustice. Before we can talk about her death, we need to talk about her life. Because Shameeka Latrice Jackson wasn't just a name in a police report or another tally on Jacksonville's homicide list. She was a woman who mattered. She had children, dreams, ambitions, and a personality that everyone who knew her says was impossible to forget. Born and raised in Jacksonville, Shameeka was the type of person who wore her heart on her sleeve. Those close to her say she was quick to laugh, generous to a fault, and had a gift for making people feel at home in her presence. Her cousin, Shatera Coakley, described her as someone who would give you the shirt off her back without hesitation. That was who she was, the one people called when they needed help, the one who showed up when others didn't. But Shameeka wasn't just a caregiver by nature. She made it her profession. She worked as a certified nursing assistant, one of the toughest, most thankless jobs in healthcare. Day after day, she cared for patients who needed her, treating them with dignity and compassion. For Shameeka, it wasn't just a paycheck. It was a calling. People say she had a gentle touch, the kind of presence that calmed even the most anxious patients. She carried that same compassion home to her children, 3 kids who were the center of her universe. Motherhood defined her. Friends say she lit up when she talked about her kids, always putting them first. She wanted them to grow up knowing that no matter what obstacles they faced, they could rise above them. Her entire world revolved around making sure they were safe, cared for, and loved. That love extended beyond words. She showed it in every action. She balanced her shifts as a CNA with raising them, and still found time to nurture a small business she created from scratch. That business, Mecca's Creations, was her way of expressing her creativity and building something her children could be proud of. She made crafts, designs, and personal creations that reflected her spirit. It wasn't just a side hustle. It was a symbol of her determination to carve out something of her own. In a city where opportunities often feel scarce, Shameeka was making her own. Her 31st birthday, July 21, 2022, should have been the start of another year full of possibility. Family members say she was in good spirits that day, celebrating with those closest to her. It wasn't a big, flashy event. Shameeka wasn't the type to need attention. She just wanted to be surrounded by love. She was a woman who measured happiness not by how many gifts she received, but by the faces of the people sitting around her. And yet, less than 24 hours later, that happiness was shattered. The very next evening she was gone, murdered inside a house on Prospect Street. A birthday celebration turned into a death sentence. The cruel irony of it all has haunted her family ever since. To lose her just one day after celebrating life felt like a cosmic injustice, a reminder of how fragile existence is in a city drowning in violence. One moment she was laughing. The next, her children were motherless. What makes this even harder is that Shameeka was doing everything right. She was working. She was raising her children. She was staying out of trouble. She wasn't someone chasing conflict or living recklessly. And yet, in Jacksonville, even those who try to live quietly and with purpose aren't safe from the violence that seeps into every corner. Her death didn't just rob her children of a mother. It robbed them of a future filled with birthday parties, school graduations, and moments of comfort that only she could provide. They will never again hear her voice cheering them on. They will never again feel her arms wrap around them at the end of a long day. The most important person in their lives was stolen, and the void she left is immeasurable. Her friends and family cling to their memories of her. Her laugh, her selflessness, the way she always showed up. They talk about her because they don't want her name to fade into silence. For them, speaking her story is the only way to fight against the darkness of her murder. And this is what we must hold on to when we talk about Shameeka. Not just that she was a 31-year-old homicide victim, but that she was a mother, a caregiver, an entrepreneur, and above all else, a human being with dreams and love in her heart. Her life was full of meaning, and that is why her death is so tragic. When her cousin Shatera stood before cameras and said she didn't deserve this, it wasn't just grief speaking. It was the truth. Shameeka deserved more. Her children deserved more. Her story deserved more. And that's why we're telling it now. It was the night of July 22, 2022, when the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office received a call that would add yet another tragedy to a city already drowning in violence. Officers were dispatched to a residence on Prospect Street in the Woodstock neighborhood. For many who live in Jacksonville, the address itself carried weight. The small, weathered home had been the site of repeated police calls in the year prior. Auto thefts, disturbances, domestic disputes. Trouble seemed to linger on its porch. But no one in the neighborhood could have imagined that this time, it would become the scene of a murder. When officers entered the home, the silence was heavy. Inside they found 31-year-old Shameeka Latrice Jackson, dead from gunshot wounds. The birthday candles she had blown out less than 24 hours earlier were already replaced by crime scene markers and the harsh glow of flashlights cutting through the dark. A life that had been celebrated one day before was now ended in violence. Neighbors recall hearing little that night. Some claimed they thought they heard a single shot. Others said they didn't hear anything at all until the sirens lit up the block. And this is the chilling truth about shootings in neighborhoods like Woodstock. The sound of gunfire is so common that many residents barely flinch. They shut their blinds. They stay silent. In a city where speaking out can make you the next target, silence has become survival. The house itself was modest, like many on the block. Paint peeling, windows covered. A yard that looked like it had seen better days. Police reports later revealed that in the 12 months before Shameeka's death, the address had been the site of at least 10 law enforcement calls. Each one a warning sign of instability. Each one a reminder that violence often simmers before it explodes. But on July 22nd, it did more than simmer. It ended a life. Detectives quickly realized this was no random crime. Shameeka hadn't been killed in a drive-by or while walking down the street. She had been killed inside a house, suggesting something far more personal. Was she targeted? Was she in the wrong place at the wrong time? Or had she walked into a conflict she didn't know was waiting? Investigators have never answered those questions publicly, leaving her family to piece together their own theories about why her life was cut short. The atmosphere on Prospect Street that night was surreal. Blue and red lights reflected off the cracked sidewalks. Yellow tape stretched across the block, cutting off the home from the rest of the world. Neighbors stood outside in small groups, whispering, shaking their heads, but never saying too much. In communities like Woodstock, suspicion runs deep. People may know what happened, but fear keeps them quiet. And in that quiet, killers find their cover. For Shameeka's family, the news came like a thunderclap. Just a day earlier, they had celebrated her 31st birthday. Now they were standing outside a taped-off crime scene, trying to make sense of the unthinkable. Her father, Jermaine Jackson, arrived devastated, his grief spilling into the microphones of local reporters. "I'm a parent that has to bury his child," he said, his voice breaking. "Do not use my daughter as your excuse to do something you have no business doing. Stop killing people." His words carried the heartbreak of a man who had just lost his daughter, and the exhaustion of a father who knew he was not the only one. In Jacksonville, too many parents have had to bury their children because of violence. The details inside the home remain scarce. Police have never released the full extent of the evidence. What we do know is that Shameeka was found shot inside, and that there was no immediate suspect. No forced entry has been confirmed. No arrests were made that night, or the nights that followed. The crime scene gave detectives a body and a mystery, but not the answers her family needed. In the days after, rumors swirled. Some whispered that the house was tied to dangerous activity. Others speculated that Shameeka had been caught in crossfire meant for someone else. There were theories but no facts. And as is so often the case in Jacksonville, the fear of retaliation meant few were willing to come forward. In neighborhoods where justice rarely comes, silence often feels safer than truth. But what makes this crime even more haunting is the timing. One day, Shameeka had been surrounded by her children and family, celebrating another year of life. The next, her body was being carried out under a white sheet. Birthdays are supposed to mark fresh beginnings, but for her, it marked the end. That cruel twist of fate, the contrast between celebration and death, still weighs heavily on those who loved her. The crime scene on Prospect Street was more than just a house with bullet holes. It was a symbol of Jacksonville's crisis. A city where police tape is as familiar as front porches. A city where homes double as crime scenes. And a city where, far too often, bodies are removed before justice can be delivered. In the weeks that followed, investigators gave the family hope. They told her cousin, Shatera, that they were making progress, that an arrest might be coming soon. But those promises faded. Days turned to weeks and weeks to months. No arrest, no names, no justice, just silence. And that's the cruelest part of the crime scene on Prospect Street. It wasn't just the place where Shameeka's life ended. It became the place where answers disappeared. When the sirens faded on Prospect Street that night and the yellow tape came down, the weight of what had happened settled on Shameeka's family like a storm that would never pass. For the officers who worked the scene, it was another homicide in a city where killings have become routine. But for her loved ones, the world had changed forever. The first to speak publicly was her father, Jermaine Jackson. He stood in front of cameras only hours after being told that his daughter had been killed. His face carried the hollowed expression of a man grappling with a reality no parent should ever have to face. "I'm a parent that has to bury his child," he said, voice trembling but firm. Then he looked into the cameras, as though speaking directly to both his daughter's killer and to the city of Jacksonville itself. "Do not use my daughter as your excuse to do something you have no business doing. Stop killing people." It wasn't just grief speaking. It was exhaustion. Jermaine's words reflected the shared pain of countless parents across Jacksonville who have been forced to stand in front of microphones and beg for the violence to stop. He didn't want his daughter to be just another statistic. He wanted the city to remember that behind every murder is a family left shattered. For her cousin Shatera Coakley, the grief came in waves. She had grown up with Shameeka, and in interviews she could barely hold back tears as she described the kind of person her cousin had been. "She would give you the shirt off her back," Shatera said, her voice breaking. To her, Shameeka wasn't just family. She was a friend, a sister, a lifeline. Her death wasn't only a loss. It was a theft of everything good that Shameeka represented. The family quickly began to organize a vigil. On a warm July evening, days after the murder, dozens of people gathered at Riverside Memorial Park to remember Shameeka. They brought candles, flowers, balloons, and photographs. Neighbors who barely knew her stood shoulder to shoulder with relatives who loved her fiercely. People cried openly, hugging each other, holding each other up when the grief was too heavy to carry alone. Candles flickered in the dark as the sound of soft prayers filled the air. Balloons were released into the sky, floating upward as if carrying messages to the woman they had lost. Her children stood among the mourners, their faces a painful reminder of what had been stolen. 3 young lives left motherless in an instant, now forced to grow up with memories instead of moments. For those who attended, the vigil was more than just a memorial. It was an act of defiance against the silence that so often follows murders in Jacksonville. Families here know how quickly names can fade from the headlines. They know how easily cases can be forgotten when the city is overwhelmed by new tragedies every week. The vigil was their way of saying, "We will not let her name disappear." But as the days turned into weeks, the promises of justice began to fade. The Jacksonville Sheriff's Office had told the family they were making progress. They had even suggested updates would be coming soon. Shatera repeated those assurances to reporters, clinging to the hope that her cousin's killer would be caught. Yet those updates never came. The phone didn't ring. The arrests never happened. Instead, silence stretched on, and with it came a new kind of pain, the pain of being forgotten. The impact on Shameeka's children has been the hardest of all. Losing a parent is devastating under any circumstances, but losing one to murder leaves scars that never heal. They are old enough to know their mother was taken from them but too young to understand why justice has not come. Every milestone they reach, a birthday, a school event, a holiday, is shadowed by the absence of the woman who should be there to celebrate with them. Her death also left a void in the daily lives of those she cared for as a CNA. Patients who relied on her suddenly lost the nurse's aide who always treated them with kindness. Co-workers lost the colleague who brought laughter into long shifts. Her absence rippled outwards in ways that numbers can't measure. For the community, her murder was both a shock and a grim reminder. It was a shock because of who she was, a caregiver, a mother, someone whose life represented love and hard work. And it was a reminder that in Jacksonville, even people who do everything right, who stay out of trouble, can still end up dead. At her vigil, one neighbor said quietly, "She didn't deserve this. None of them do." And that is the core truth of Shameeka's story. She didn't deserve to be gunned down. Her children didn't deserve to grow up without a mother. Her family didn't deserve to stand in front of cameras, begging for justice in a city where justice so often fails to arrive. The aftermath of Shameeka's death is a story of grief, but it is also a story of resilience. Her family has refused to let her name fade, speaking about her, remembering her, insisting that she be more than just a headline from July 2022. But the fact remains. Nearly 3 years later, her case is unsolved. Her children are still waiting. Her father is still mourning. Her cousin is still crying. And the city of Jacksonville, for all its beauty and promise, remains haunted by another life cut short, another vigil, another unanswered question. In the first days after July 22, 2022, when Shameeka Jackson was found shot to death inside the Prospect Street home, detectives from the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office moved quickly. They spoke to family, canvassed the neighborhood, and gathered evidence from the scene. To those who knew and loved her, the speed gave hope. Maybe this time justice would come. Maybe this time, the killer wouldn't vanish into the shadows like so many others had before. Her cousin, Shatara Coakley, shared what detectives told her in those first conversations. They said they were making progress. They hinted that answers were close, that the family could expect updates soon. That assurance mattered. When you're standing in grief, even a small promise of justice can feel like something solid to hold on to. But days passed, then weeks, then months, and the updates never came. By the fall of 2022, there had been no arrests, no public statements about suspects, and no motive released. The murder of a 31-year-old mother of 3 had slipped quietly out of the news cycle. Her name stopped appearing in headlines. And the family was left with only silence. Why do cases like Shameeka's go quiet? Part of the answer lies in the way Jacksonville's justice system works, or doesn't. The JSO investigates more homicides than almost any other law enforcement agency in Florida. In 2022 alone, they were tasked with more than 170 murder cases. Each one required detectives, resources, and time. But with so many cases piling up, many slip to the bottom of the pile when leads run dry. Then there's the issue of witnesses. In neighborhoods like Woodstock, where Shameeka was killed, people live by a code of silence. They may know who pulled the trigger. They may have seen something. But they also know the risks of speaking up. Retaliation is real. Killers in Jacksonville often stay in the same neighborhoods as the families they've hurt. If someone names a name, their life and the lives of their loved ones can be put in danger. So people stay quiet. And silence kills justice. Community distrust of law enforcement makes the problem worse. Decades of tension between police and residents have created a wall. Many don't believe JSO will protect them if they come forward. Some believe detectives don't fight as hard for cases in poorer neighborhoods or for victims who aren't high profile. Whether that's perception or reality, the result is the same. Witnesses don't talk, and families like Shameeka's are left waiting. By 2023, Shameeka's case had all the signs of a cold case. There were no press conferences, no sketches of suspects, no public calls for new information. Crime Stoppers still listed her case, but it was just one among dozens of names. This is a familiar story in Jacksonville. Families are often told detectives are working on it, only to find that their cases slowly fade into the background. For every high-profile case that makes headlines for months, there are dozens of others that slip into silence. And the silence doesn't just rob families of answers. It robs them of hope. Without updates, without even a sense that someone is pushing forward, grief hardens into despair. Shameeka's father has said little publicly since his emotional plea after her murder. Her cousin has moved from expectation to frustration. And her children, they live with the knowledge that their mother's killer may never be named. The tragedy of Shameeka's case points to larger failures in Jacksonville's system. Overwhelmed investigators. With one of the highest homicide rates in Florida, detectives simply can't give every case the attention it deserves. Leads go stale, evidence grows cold, and resources get redirected to new crimes. Fear in the community. In neighborhoods where gun violence is common, witnesses don't speak. The no snitching culture isn't just about loyalty, it's about survival. People know that telling the truth could get them killed. Inequality in justice. Families in wealthier or higher-profile cases often see faster results. But for families like Shameeka's, who live in neighborhoods already plagued by violence, justice is far less certain. Lack of transparency. When cases go cold, families are often left in the dark. Police stop updating them, stop communicating, and the silence becomes unbearable. For Shameeka's children, silence is more than an absence of justice. It's an absence of answers. They will grow up asking questions that may never be answered. Who killed my mom and why? Will they ever be punished? For her father and cousin, silence is a scar that never heals. They stood before cameras, begged for justice, organized vigils, and waited. But the silence speaks louder than any update ever could. It says, "This case is not a priority." And for Jacksonville, silence has become part of the city's identity. Too many murders end this way. Too many families are left lighting candles, staring at photos, and holding on to memories instead of answers. The cycle continues, and with each unsolved case, the city's trust in its own system weakens further. Shameeka's case is not unique. It is part of a pattern. Hundreds of Jacksonville families live in the same limbo. Their loved ones gone, their killers free, and the system quiet. Each new homicide pushes the old ones further back. Each new candlelight vigil dims the memory of the last. And that's what makes Shameeka's story so tragic. She wasn't a statistic. She wasn't a stranger. She was a mother, a nurse, a woman with dreams. But in Jacksonville, that wasn't enough to save her from silence. 3 years have passed since July 22, 2022. And the murder of Shameeka Jackson remains unsolved. For her family, each day without answers is a new wound layered on top of old ones. The pain of losing her has not dulled. It has sharpened, hardened, and deepened with every unanswered question. 'Cause there are so many questions. Who killed her? Was she the intended target that night inside the Prospect Street home? Or was she caught in the fallout of someone else's dispute? Did she walk into danger unknowingly? Or was danger already waiting for her? Was the troubled history of that address tied to her death? Or was that simply coincidence? Why did detectives go quiet after promising answers? And the hardest question of all, why does justice seem so rare in Jacksonville? These aren't just questions her family asks. They are questions that haunt her community, and by extension, an entire city. When a woman like Shameeka, a mother of 3, a caregiver, a dreamer, someone trying to build something better, can be murdered with no resolution, what does that say about the value of life in Jacksonville? For her children, the questions are especially cruel. They will grow up asking them not once but over and over, as they get older and understand more of the world. Why did my mother die? Who killed her? Why didn't anyone stop it? Why hasn't anyone been punished? They will hear the story of how she was killed just one day after her 31st birthday, and they will live with the bitter irony that the woman who spent her life giving love and care was taken so violently. For her father, Jermaine, the unanswered questions hang in every room, in every quiet moment. He begged the community to stop the violence, to honor his daughter by breaking the cycle. But his plea went unanswered, and so did his daughter's case. He must carry the unbearable knowledge that the person who murdered his child is still free. For her cousin Shatera, the questions are personal and piercing. She has spoken about her cousin's kindness, her generosity, her love. But beneath the memories lies the echo of those questions. Who did this and why? She has to live with the emptiness of promises that never came true, with the silence of an investigation that seemed to forget her cousin existed. Shameeka's murder is not an isolated story. It is part of Jacksonville's ongoing crisis, a pattern of killings that outpace arrests, of families left waiting, of questions that never find answers. Between 2022 and 2024, Jacksonville recorded hundreds of homicides, many of which remain unsolved. Every one of them left behind unanswered questions. Every one of them left behind families like Shameeka's. Every one of them added to a city-wide wound that keeps bleeding. The silence from law enforcement is not always intentional. Detectives may still be working. They may still be holding on to evidence, following leads quietly. But for the families, silence feels like abandonment. And when months turn to years, silence becomes the only answer they are given. This is the broader crisis. Not just that people are being killed, but that justice is not being delivered. In Jacksonville, murder has become normalized, and unsolved murder has become routine. But Shameeka's story is not just about violence. It is about the life she lived, and the legacy she left behind. She was a mother who loved her children, a CNA who cared for patients, a dreamer who built her own small business, a woman who gave without hesitation. Her life mattered. Her death mattered. And the lack of justice matters. Her children will carry her legacy forward, even if they carry it with grief. Her family will keep speaking her name, even when the city forgets. And her story, now part of a series that looks behind the headlines, is a reminder that she was more than a case number. She was Shameeka. Jacksonville must face its reality. It cannot be a city of sunshine and growth if it continues to let murders fade into silence. It cannot call itself a community if it allows families to stand at vigils year after year, with no answers. It cannot move forward until it faces the truth, that justice delayed is justice denied. Shameeka's unsolved murder is not just a family's tragedy. It is a city's failure. A failure to protect, a failure to solve, a failure to deliver the most basic promise of justice. And unless Jacksonville finds a way to break this cycle, more names will join hers. On the night of her vigil, balloons floated into the sky. Candles flickered against the darkness. People whispered her name, cried her name, refused to let it be forgotten. That night, for a brief moment, her story felt larger than silence. But when the candles burned out, the silence returned. Today her case remains unsolved. Her killer remains free. Her children remain motherless. And her family remains broken. So we end with the hardest truth. Unless someone speaks, unless something changes, the murder of Shameeka Jackson may remain one more unsolved case in a city already drowning in them. But her story will not be forgotten here. Stay tuned for part 2 of Unsolved Jacksonville, where we uncover another case lost in silence. This has been Criminally Human, where behind every headline is a person, a story, and a tragedy that didn't have to happen. Please like, share, and subscribe.